I walked into the dining room of the Cannon estate, holding a $200 bottle of Cabernet. It was a vintage my husband, Justin, specifically asked for. He said it would smooth things over with his mother. He said if I brought the good wine, smiled, and just listened, tonight would be different. I should have known better. The air in the room was stifling, smelling of expensive potpourri and old money, or at least the pretense of money. Justin's parents, Richard and Lydia, sat at the heads of the long mahogany table like royalty holding court. The good china was out. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier. Everyone was already seated. Justin was there, looking everywhere, but at me. His sister, Megan, was on his left, whispering something into his ear that made her smirk. I took a breath, adjusted the collar of my silk blouse, and stepped forward. I am 62 years old. I have run companies. I have managed multi-million-dollar budgets. I am not a child, and I am certainly not someone who gets nervous about a Sunday dinner. But in this house, I was never Elizabeth the successful professional. I was just the second wife. I moved toward the empty chair next to Justin. It was the only spot left. I was about to set the wine down on the tablecloth when Megan moved. Fast as a viper, she reached out and dropped her oversized designer purse right onto the seat of the chair. I froze. I looked at the bag, then at her. "Excuse me, Megan," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'd like to sit down." Megan didn't even turn her body toward me. She picked up her water glass, took a slow sip, and then looked me up and down with a bored expression. "Oh, didn't Justin tell you?" she said, her voice loud enough to stop all conversation at the table. "We're discussing legacy matters tonight. Elizabeth. Family only." The room went dead silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I looked at Justin's parents. Lydia was busy smoothing her napkin, pretending not to hear. Richard was staring at the wall. They were letting her do this. They were enjoying it. "I am family," I said, my grip tightening on the neck of the wine bottle. "I've been married to your brother for 5 years. Megan laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "You're his wife? Sure. But you're not family. Not for this conversation. Go find another table. Second wives don't belong at the main table when we're talking about the Cannon future." My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't fear, it was shock. In all the years of snide comments and forgotten birthdays, they had never been this direct. They had never physically barred me from a seat. I turned to Justin. This was the moment. This was the moment any decent husband stands up, pushes his sister's purse onto the floor, and pulls out the chair for his wife. I waited for it. I needed it. "Justin," I said. He finally looked up. His face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously toward his mother. He looked like a frightened little boy, not a 65-year-old man. He cleared his throat, but he didn't reach for the purse. He didn't stand up. "Liz," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe it's better if you just give us an hour." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Just eat in the sunroom, Liz," he said, pleading with his eyes for me not to make a scene. "Just for tonight. She's having a hard day. Please, don't make it worse." The sunroom, the glass-enclosed porch at the back of the house where they fed the grandchildren during the holidays so they wouldn't mess up the carpets. He was banishing me to the kids' table. He was telling me to sit alone in a cold glass room while he ate roast beef with the people who hated me. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It wasn't a scream. It was a quiet, final click, like a lock turning. For 5 years, I had tried. I had cooked the turkeys. I had bought the thoughtful gifts. I had listened to stories about Rebecca, his first wife, and how perfect she was. I had swallowed every insult because I loved Justin, and I thought that if I just loved him enough, eventually they would respect me. But as I looked at Justin, cowering in his chair, terrified of upsetting his 80-year-old mother, I realized the truth. It wasn't just them. It was him. He wasn't a victim of his family. He was their accomplice. The sunroom, I repeated flatly. Just for an hour, Justin whispered. I'll come get you for dessert. For dessert. Like I was a dog being let back inside for a treat. I looked around the table one last time. I saw Megan's triumphant smirk. I saw Lydia's cold satisfaction. I saw the empty chair with the purse on it, guarding a seat that should have been mine. I didn't cry. I felt tears pricking the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. My hand was shaking, but not because I was sad. I was shaking with a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. I placed the bottle of vintage Cabernet in the center of the table, right between the roast and the potatoes. The heavy glass made a loud thud against the wood. Enjoy the wine, I said. My voice was calm, scary calm. I hope it pairs well with the conversation. Elizabeth, wait, Justin said, half rising from his chair. I didn't wait. I didn't look back. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. My heels clicked loudly on the hardwood floor of the hallway. I walked past the family portraits that didn't include me. I walked past the sunroom where they wanted me to hide. I walked straight to the front door, grabbed my keys, and stepped out into the humid Florida night. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. I stood there on the driveway for a moment, looking back at the massive house. They thought they had won. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought I would drive around the block, cry in my car, and come back when I was ready to behave. They had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea who they had just insulted. Justin had told me to find another table. He didn't realize that without me, he wouldn't have a table to sit at. I got into my car, started the engine, and didn't look back. I wasn't going to the sunroom. I was going to war. I didn't drive home. I couldn't. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, making my hands shake on the steering wheel. I needed a moment to breathe, to think, to let the reality of what just happened settle in. I pulled into the clubhouse at the entrance of their gated community, the one with the marble floors and the annual dues that cost more than most people's cars. I walked into the ladies' lounge. It was empty, quiet, and smelled of lavender and money. I locked the door to the private powder room behind me and leaned against the granite vanity. I looked at myself in the mirror. I expected to see a victim. I expected to see a 62-year-old woman with mascara running down her cheeks, broken by the cruelty of her husband's family. But the woman staring back at me wasn't crying. She was adjusting her collar. She was fixing her hair. They thought they knew me. To Megan, to Richard and Lydia, and apparently even to Justin, I was just Elizabeth, the second wife, the one who came after the beloved Rebecca, the one they whispered about calling me a gold digger who got lucky marrying a canon. They thought I was some retired administrative assistant who spent her days lunching and spending their family money. They were so wrong, it was almost funny. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. What they didn't know, what Justin had begged me to keep secret for 5 years, was that I wasn't just a wife. Before I met Justin, I was the chief financial officer for a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago. I didn't just marry money. I knew how to make it, manage it, and most importantly, how to save it. I unlocked my phone and opened my secure banking app. 5 years ago, right after Justin and I got married, the great Canon legacy they were so proud of tonight was actually burning to the ground. Justin had come to me late one night, weeping at our kitchen table. He told me the truth his parents refused to admit. Richard had made bad investments. Terrible ones. They were leveraged to the hilt. The banks were calling. Foreclosure wasn't just a possibility. It was a week away. They were going to lose everything. The Naples estate, the status, the country club membership, all of it. Justin had begged me for help. Not for advice, but for a lifeline. He said his parents were too old to start over. He said the humiliation would kill his father. He asked me to save them, but with one condition: they could never know it was me. Their pride was too fragile. They had to believe the family trust had suddenly performed well. So I did it. I did it for love. I didn't give them cash. I wasn't stupid. I formed an anonymous LLC, Gulf Shore Holdings, and I bought the debt. I bought the mortgage on their house. Technically, I bought the house. For 5 years, I have been the one approving the maintenance requests. I am the one paying the property taxes. I am the reason they are still sleeping in those silk sheets. The family trust they bragged about tonight, it's empty. It has been empty since 2019. The allowance they live on comes from a stipend I deposit into Justin's account every month, which he quietly transfers to them. I looked at the phone screen. A notification was waiting for me. It was from Mark, the property manager I hired to act as the face of Gulf Shore Holdings. Message from Mark. Hi, Elizabeth. Just a reminder. The 5-year lease renewal for the Cannon residence is up next week. The tenants haven't sent the paperwork. Do you want me to auto-renew like we discussed last year? I stared at the text. Auto-renew. That was the plan. The plan was to let them live there until they died, blissfully unaware that the second wife they despised was actually their landlord. I was going to let them keep their pride. I was going to let them keep their legacy. But then I heard Megan's voice in my head again. Go find another table. Second wives don't belong. I thought about the purse on the chair. I thought about Justin telling me to eat in the sunroom. I thought about the 5 years of silence, the checks I wrote to cover their country club tabs while they treated me like the help. They wanted to talk about legacy? Fine. Let's talk about ownership. You don't get to kick the landlord out of her own dining room. I tapped the reply box. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about Justin's feelings. He had his chance to protect me, and he chose to protect his inheritance, an inheritance that didn't even exist. I typed slowly, savoring every letter. No, do not renew. I paused for a second, watching the cursor blink. Then I added the rest. Prepare the eviction notice. 30 days. No extensions. Send it via courier tomorrow morning. I hit send. I watched the little delivered checkmark appear. It was done. I put the phone back in my purse and looked in the mirror one last time. The anger was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't hot and messy anymore. It was cold. It was calculating. I wasn't just the second wife. I was the CEO of their reality, and I had just fired them. I washed my hands, dried them on a thick paper towel, and walked out of the clubhouse. I had a husband to go home to, or at least a tenant. I wondered if he would still be crying about his mother's bad day when he found out they were homeless. I got back into my car and drove out of the gate. For the first time all night, I smiled. Real, genuine amusement. They wanted me to find another table. That was fine, because I was about to take away the whole house. I sat in my car just outside the gate for exactly 2 minutes. My heart was still pounding, but the panic was gone, replaced by a clarity sharp enough to cut glass. Leaving felt good. It felt like freedom. But as I watched the security guard wave another luxury sedan through the entrance, I realized that leaving was also exactly what they expected. If I drove home now, I was the emotional second wife who couldn't handle the heat. I was the dramatic woman who ruined Sunday dinner. They would spend the next 2 hours drinking my wine, eating the roast beef, and solidifying their narrative that I was unstable, unworthy, and weak. They would pat Justin on the back and tell him he was a saint for dealing with me. I couldn't let them have that victory. I put the car in reverse, swung around, and drove right back through the residence lane. I parked my car in the driveway, right behind Megan's oversized SUV. I wasn't going to hide. I was going back in. But before I did, I had one final piece of business to handle. I walked around the side of the house to the stone terrace. The night air was thick and humid, the kind of Florida heat that sticks to your skin. The terrace doors were slightly open, and I could hear the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of their voices. They hadn't even paused the meal. My absence hadn't caused a disruption. It had caused relief. I pulled my phone out again. I had sent the text to Mark, my property manager, but a text wasn't enough. I needed to hear the confirmation. I needed to know the wheels were turning. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice professional but confused. "Elizabeth, it's Sunday night. Is everything okay? Did you get my text, Mark?" I asked, keeping my voice low. I watched the silhouette of Richard through the sheer curtains of the dining room window. He was pouring more wine. My wine. "I did," Mark said, sounding hesitant. "But I wanted to double-check before I did anything official. You're talking about the Cannon account. You've renewed that lease automatically for 4 years. You want to serve an eviction notice? To your in-laws." "They aren't my in-laws tonight, Mark. They are delinquent tenants." "Okay," Mark said slowly. "But you know the terms. If we execute the termination clause, they have 30 days. It's going to be a shock. Are you sure you don't want to just raise the rent or—" "No," I cut him off. "Execute the clause. The 30-day notice. I want them out." There was a pause on the line. I could feel Mark shifting gears from property manager to executioner. "All right. I'll have the legal team draft the papers first thing in the morning. They'll be served by courier on Tuesday." "Make it Monday," I said. "I want it on the doorstep by noon tomorrow." "Understood. Noon tomorrow." I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling again, but this time it was from the sheer magnitude of what I had just done. This was the nuclear option. There was no going back from this. I stood there in the dark, looking at the massive house that I secretly owned. For years, I had walked on eggshells in these hallways. I remembered the first Christmas I spent here. I had bought Lydia a beautiful cashmere shawl. She had opened it, looked at it with a polite, tight smile, and said, "Oh, thank you, dear. Rebecca always used to knit me scarves." She had such a personal touch. Rebecca, the ghost that haunted every room. Rebecca wouldn't have worn that dress, Megan had whispered at a birthday party once. Rebecca understood. That family comes first. Richard had lectured me when I missed a dinner for a board meeting. They constantly measured me against a dead woman, using her memory as a weapon to make me feel small. But here was the irony that made me want to laugh out loud. Rebecca was lovely, I'm sure, but Rebecca didn't have the business acumen to save them from ruin. If Rebecca were still here, this house would have been foreclosed on 5 years ago. They would be living in a condo in Fort Myers, not an estate in Naples. They worshipped the woman who would have watched them drown and despised the woman who had built them a life raft. "She's just here for the money," I had heard Lydia whisper to a neighbor once. If only they knew. I wasn't here for the money. I was the money. I took a deep breath, smoothing my skirt. It was time to play the role they wanted. I walked to the French doors and slipped back into the house. The cool air conditioning hit me instantly. I walked quietly down the hallway toward the dining room. I could hear Megan laughing, a shrill, unkind sound. "Honestly, it's embarrassing," she was saying. "She has such thin skin. You'd think at her age she'd have more grace. She just doesn't understand our ways." Lydia added, her voice dripping with fake pity. It takes a certain breeding to handle legacy talk. I stepped into the doorway. The laughter died instantly. Justin looked up, his eyes widening. He looked terrified, like he expected me to start throwing plates. "Liz, you came back." "I did," I said softly. I didn't look at Megan. I didn't look at his parents. I looked only at my husband. "I realized you were right, Justin. I shouldn't disrupt the family discussion." "Oh," Justin exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Good. That's good, Liz." So, I continued, gesturing toward the back of the house. "I'll just go to the sunroom." "Like you asked." The room went dead silent again. I think, for a second, they felt a flicker of shame. Sending a 62-year-old woman to eat alone in a glass porch while they feasted in the dining room was cruel, and deep down, they knew it. But their arrogance was stronger than their conscience. "That would be best," Richard grunted, cutting into his steak. "We have matters to discuss." I nodded. I walked into the kitchen, picked up a plate, and served myself a small portion of the roast beef and potatoes. I poured myself a glass of water. Tap water, not the wine. Then I walked past them, through the dining room, and opened the door to the sunroom. The sunroom was humid and smelled of chlorine from the nearby pool. It was isolated from the main house by a wall of sliding glass doors. I sat down at the small wicker table usually reserved for the grandkids' coloring books. From my seat, I had a perfect view of the dining room. It was like watching a silent movie. I could see them, but I couldn't hear them. I saw Megan pour herself another glass of my wine. I saw Lydia laughing at something Richard said. I saw Justin eating quickly, keeping his head down, trying to pretend his wife wasn't sitting 10 feet away behind a pane of glass. They ignored me. They went back to their meal, their laughter, and their legacy talk. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me, put me in my place, and successfully exiled the intruder. I cut a piece of roast beef and took a bite. It was cold, but I didn't mind. I watched them with a small, cold smile. "Eat up," I thought, watching Megan gesture grandly with her fork. "Enjoy the china. Enjoy the view. Enjoy the ceiling high above your heads." They were celebrating their victory in a castle made of sand, and they had no idea that the tide had already turned. I wasn't the exile in the sunroom. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, sitting quietly in the gallery, waiting for the gavel to drop. Monday noon. That was when the clock would run out. I took a sip of water and watched my husband laugh at something his sister said. He looked relaxed now that I was out of sight. That hurt more than the eviction ever could. But the pain was good. The pain was fuel. I sat there for 45 minutes, silent and invisible, knowing that this was the last meal they would ever eat at this table. And that knowledge tasted sweeter than any vintage wine. I sat in that sunroom for what felt like hours, pushing the cold roast beef around my plate. The humidity of the Florida night was starting to seep through the glass, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was a coldness that came from memory. As I watched Justin pour another glass of wine for his mother in the dining room, my mind drifted back 5 years. Back to the night that changed everything. Back to the night I bought this abuse. It was 3 months after our wedding. We were still in the honeymoon phase, or so I thought. I woke up at 2 a.m. because the other side of the bed was cold. I went downstairs to our kitchen in Chicago and found Justin sitting at the island, his head in his hands. He was sobbing, not just crying. He was heaving the kind of guttural despair you only hear when someone's world has ended. I rushed over. "Justin, is it your health? Is it the kids?" He shook his head, unable to speak for a moment. He pushed a stack of papers across the granite counter toward me. I picked them up. "I'm a CFO. I speak the language of numbers better than I speak English. It took me less than 30 seconds to understand what I was looking at. They were foreclosure notices, bank letters, delinquency reports. It's Mom and Dad. Justin choked out. The legacy, the trust, it's gone. Liz, it's all gone. I sat down, stunned. What do you mean gone? Dad made bad investments in '08 and never recovered, he confessed. Mom refused to stop spending. They've been living on credit and refinancing the Naples house for a decade. The balloon payment is due next week. The bank is taking the house. They're going to be homeless. I looked at the numbers again. It was a financial bloodbath. They owed more than the house was worth in the current market. But to them, that house was their identity. Losing it wouldn't just be a financial hit. It would be a social death sentence in their circle. They don't know I know, Justin whispered. Dad is talking about. He's talking about not wanting to be here anymore if the sheriff comes to the door. Liz, I don't know what to do. He looked at me with such desperation. He wasn't the confident man I married. He was a terrified son trying to save his parents from their own stupidity. I looked at the foreclosure date. 5 days. I had a choice. I could have patted his hand, told him I was sorry, and let the chips fall where they may. That would have been the smart financial move. That would have been the logical thing to do. But I loved him. And when you love someone, you try to fix what's broken. I can fix it, I said quietly. Justin looked up, his eyes red and swollen. What? How? We don't have that kind of cash liquid. We don't, I said, but I do. I had worked for 40 years. I had stock options from the logistics firm. I had a retirement portfolio I had aggressively built since I was 25. I called it my freedom fund. It was supposed to be for travel, for security, for my own old age. I can liquidate my portfolio, I told him. The words tasted like ash in my mouth even as I said them. I can form an LLC. I'll buy the debt from the bank. I'll become the note holder. They can stay in the house. Justin stared at me like I was an angel who had just descended from heaven. He grabbed my hands and kissed them, weeping. You would do that, he asked. You would save them after how cold they've been to you at the wedding? I'm doing it for you, I said firmly, but there are conditions. I want an LLC so they don't know it's me. If they know I bought their house, they'll hate me for it. Their pride won't take it. I promise, Justin said. He looked me dead in the eye, gripping my hands so tight it hurt. Liz, if you do this, if you save my family, I will make sure they treat you like a queen. I will never let them disrespect you. You are the only reason we still have a name. I promise you, I will make them respect you. That was the deal. That was the contract. I liquidated 60% of my life savings the next morning. I signed the papers. I set up Gulf Shore Holdings. I saved the Cannon legacy. Now, sitting in the sunroom 5 years later, I watched Justin laughing at the table. He had broken the contract. He hadn't made them treat me like a queen. He hadn't even made them treat me like a human being. He had watched them chip away at me for 5 years, terrified that if he stood up to them, he might upset the delicate fantasy I had paid for. He promised me respect in exchange for security. He had taken the security and thrown the respect in the trash. I looked down at my hands. They were the same hands he had kissed that night in the kitchen. They were the same hands that signed the wire transfer that saved his parents from humiliation. And tonight, those same hands were shaking because his sister had put a purse on my chair and told me I didn't belong. The sadness I felt began to harden into something solid. I wasn't just a wife who had been insulted. I was an investor who had been defrauded. I had upheld my end of the bargain. I had kept the secret. I had paid the bills. I had kept the roof over their heads. Justin had failed his end. And in business, when one party breaches the contract, the deal is void. I took a sip of the warm tap water. You broke the promise, Justin, I thought, watching him raise a toast to his father. You forgot who paid for the wine. You forgot who owns the table. The flashback faded, leaving me back in the humid sunroom with a cold clarity. The history didn't matter anymore. The sacrifice didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that the lease was up. And so was my patience. The following Sunday, the atmosphere at the Cannon estate was electric. If the previous dinner had been tense, this one was manic. There was a palpable buzz in the air, the kind of greedy anticipation you see at a casino when someone thinks the slot machine is about to hit the jackpot. I wore a tailored navy blue suit. It was business attire. Armor. I wanted to look less like a wife and more like what I actually was, the decision maker. Lydia was wearing her best pearls. Richard had trimmed his mustache and was pouring the good scotch, not the stuff they served guests, but the dusty bottle from the back of the cabinet. Megan was actually smiling at me. It was a predatory smile, teeth bared like a shark that smells blood in the water. So glad you could join us at the main table tonight. Elizabeth, Megan said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Justin said we're finally signing the updated trust documents. It's important for the whole family to be here to witness the distribution. She emphasized the word distribution with a greedy little gleam in her eye. She thought the legacy talks were concluding with a payout. She thought that somehow, miraculously, the empty trust fund had replenished itself. I looked at Justin. He was sweating. He was pacing near the fireplace, tugging at his collar. He caught my eye and gave me a pleading look. He thought I had arranged this meeting to bail them out again. He assumed I had told my lawyer to draft some new stipend agreement, something to keep his parents happy, and the lie alive for another few years. He thought I was capitulating. Yes, I said calmly, taking a seat. It is important for everyone to be here. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. That must be Mr. Henderson, Richard announced, puffing out his chest. Show him in. Mr. Henderson walked in. He was a tall, severe man with silver hair and a briefcase that looked heavy. He was my lawyer. He had been my lawyer for 20 years in Chicago. The Cannons thought he was the family attorney simply because he handled the Gulf Shore Holdings paperwork. They didn't know he answered solely to me. Good evening, Mr. Henderson said. He didn't smile. He walked to the head of the table, bypassing Richard, and placed his briefcase on the wood. The click of the latches opening sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mr. Henderson, Richard said, extending a hand that Henderson ignored. We are ready to sign. I assume the restructuring is complete. The documents are prepared, Henderson said flatly. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out 4 thick manila envelopes. He didn't hand them to Richard. He slid one to Richard, one to Lydia, one to Megan, and the last one to Justin. Please, Henderson gestured. Open them. The sound of tearing paper filled the room. It was the sound of greed unwrapping its present. Megan was the first to pull the papers out. She scanned the top page, her brow furrowing. What is this? This isn't a check. What is a notice to quit? Lydia squinted at her document, adjusting her reading glasses. Richard, I don't understand. It says termination of tenancy. Is this some kind of legal formality for the tax write-off? Richard's face had gone from flushed to paper white. He was reading the document closely, his hands beginning to shake. Gulf Shore Holdings, pursuant to the lease agreement dated 5 years ago, notice is hereby given. He looked up, his eyes wild. Henderson, what is the meaning of this? Who is this Gulf Shore Holdings? We have a trust. This is our house. We don't have a lease. The room erupted into confusion. It says we have 30 days to vacate the premises. Megan shrieked, slamming the paper onto the table. 30 days? Who are these people? Justin, do something. Call the police. Someone is trying to steal our house. Justin stood there, holding his envelope unopened. He was staring at me. He knew. He knew who Gulf Shore Holdings was. He just didn't know I had pulled the trigger. His face was a mask of pure horror. It's a mistake, Lydia wailed, clutching her pearls. It must be a clerical error. Richard, tell them it's an error. Mr. Henderson, Richard barked, finding his voice. I demand to speak to the owner of this Gulf Shore Holdings immediately. Get them on the phone. I'll sue them into oblivion. They can't evict the Cannons from the Cannon estate. Mr. Henderson didn't speak. He just turned his head slowly and looked at me. The room went silent. One by one, they followed his gaze. Richard looked at me. Lydia looked at me. Megan looked at me with her mouth hanging open. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I didn't yell. I didn't throw wine. I spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a CEO addressing a board of directors that was about to be fired. You don't need a phone, Richard, I said. The owner is right here. Lydia blinked, confused. What? You? Gulf Shore Holdings is my company, I said. I bought the debt on this house 5 years ago when the bank was 3 days away from foreclosing on you. I paid off your loans. I paid the taxes. I have paid for every light bulb, every blade of grass, and every bottle of scotch you've been drinking tonight. Liar! Megan screamed. You're lying. You're just a secretary. You don't have that kind of money. I was a CFO for 30 years, Megan. I cut her off, my voice sharp as a whip. And unlike this family, I know how to keep my money. I walked around the table, stopping behind Justin's chair. He wouldn't look at me. He was trembling. Justin came to me 5 years ago, crying in our kitchen. I continued, addressing the parents. He begged me to save you. He begged me to save your pride. He made me promise to keep it a secret so you wouldn't feel diminished. So I bought the house. I let you live here rent-free. I gave you an allowance. I paused, letting the reality sink in. Richard looked like he was having a stroke. Lydia was gasping for air. I had one condition, I said, looking directly at Megan. Respect. I told Justin that if I saved his family, he had to ensure I was treated with dignity. I picked up the notice to vacate from the table and held it up. Last week, at this very table, I was told to go find another table. I was told that second wives don't belong. I dropped the paperback down. It landed with a soft slap. Well, you were right. I don't belong at this table, and neither does my money. If I'm not family enough to sit with you, then I'm certainly not family enough to subsidize your lifestyle. You can't do this, Richard sputtered. We have rights. Squatters' rights. Actually, you don't, Mr. Henderson interjected smoothly. You signed a lease agreement 5 years ago under the guise of the trust restructuring. It's a standard rental contract. Clause 4B. The landlord reserves the right to terminate tenancy with 30 days written notice. This is that notice. Justin, Lydia screamed, turning to her son. Do something. She's your wife. Tell her to stop this insanity. Justin looked up at me. His eyes were wet. Liz, please. They're old. You can't. I can, I said coldly. And I am. You had 5 years to fix this, Justin. You had 5 years to stand up for me. You didn't. You watched them humiliate me, and you looked at your plate. Now look at the papers. My heart. Lydia suddenly gasped. She threw her hand to her chest and slumped sideways in her chair, letting out a dramatic moan. I'm having a heart attack. Richard, catch me? It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Megan rushed to her side, screaming. You killed her. You killed my mother. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I watched Lydia peek through one squinted eye to see if I was buying it. She's fine, I said, grabbing my purse. But if you're worried, you can call an ambulance. I'm sure they'll help you pack. Get out. Megan shrieked at me, her face twisted and ugly. Get out of our house. I stopped at the doorway and turned back one last time. It's not your house, Megan, I said. It's my investment property, and I'm liquidating my assets. I nodded to Mr. Henderson. Finish up here. I'll be in the car. I walked out of the dining room for the last time. Behind me, the chaos was deafening, screaming, fake sobbing, and the sound of a family realizing that their golden parachute had just been cut. I walked out into the cool night air. I felt lighter than I had in years. I had dropped the bomb, and I didn't care about the wreckage. I just hoped Justin realized that when the dust settled, he was going to have to choose which side of the rubble he wanted to stand on. The drive back to our house was silent, not the peaceful silence of a couple comfortable in their shared space, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb squad waiting for the timer to hit 0. Justin drove with white knuckles, staring straight ahead at the dark Florida highway. I looked out the passenger window, watching the palm trees blur by, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. When we pulled into our driveway, our modest, lovely home that was actually ours, Justin didn't turn off the car immediately. He just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, his chest heaving. You can't do this, Liz, he whispered. It was the first thing he had said in 20 minutes. I unbuckled my seatbelt. It's already done, Justin. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. He scrambled out after me, stumbling a bit in his haste. He followed me into the kitchen, shedding his jacket, his face a mess of tears and sweat. Liz, please, he begged, catching my arm as I reached for a glass of water. You have to call Henderson. You have to stop this. You made your point. You scared them. They get it now, but you can't actually kick them out. I pulled my arm away gently, but firmly. I leaned against the counter and looked at him. This was the man I had loved for 5 years. The man I had bailed out. The man I had protected. And right now, looking at his desperate, tear-stained face, I didn't feel love. I felt pity. Why can't I? I asked calmly. Because they're my parents, he cried, his voice cracking. Mom is 82 years old. Liz, 82. She has arthritis. She can barely walk up the stairs. And Dad, you know his heart isn't good. The stress of a move like this, it could kill him. You want that on your conscience. He was playing the cards I knew he would play. Guilt, duty, the burden of the bigger person. It's a burden women my age know well. We are always expected to be the peacemakers. We are always expected to swallow our pride, absorb the insults, and smooth things over for the sake of family harmony. I don't want anyone to die, Justin, I said, but they aren't going to die. They have money, or at least they have the allowance I gave them this month. They can rent a condo. They can go to a hotel. They aren't destitute. But the shame, Justin argued, pacing the kitchen floor. Think about the humiliation. All their friends, the club, everyone will know. It will destroy them. They tried to destroy me tonight. I reminded him. They tried to erase me. You sat there and watched your sister put a purse on my chair. You watched her tell me I didn't belong. You told me to eat in the sunroom. Justin flinched. I know I messed up. I was a coward. I admit it. I should have defended you. But does the punishment fit the crime? Kicking elderly people onto the street because they were rude? That's not you, Liz. You're kind. You're generous. You're the woman who saved them 5 years ago. I was that woman. I corrected him. But they killed her. Tonight, at that dinner table, they killed the part of me that wanted to save them. He grabbed my hands again, dropping to his knees on the kitchen tile. It was a dramatic, pathetic gesture. Please, I'm begging you, just give them 6 months. 6 months to find a place, quietly. Let them say it was their idea to downsize. Let them keep their dignity. Do it for me. If you love me, you'll give them 6 months. I looked down at him. This was the hardest moment. This was the debatable decision. A part of me, the part that was raised to be a good wife, a good Christian, a good woman, wanted to say, yes, it would be so easy. I could be the savior again. I could be the martyr. I could let them stay. And for the rest of their lives, they would know I held the power. I could save my marriage right now by just saying the word, okay. But then I thought about the next 6 months. I thought about the snide comments that would continue. I thought about how they would spin this, how they would tell their friends that I was the villain who forced them out, even if I gave them time. I thought about the fact that mercy to people like them looks like weakness. If I gave them 6 months, I was telling them that my dignity was negotiable. I was telling Justin that he could treat me like a doormat, and I would still clean up his mess if he cried hard enough. I pulled my hands out of his grip. No, I said. Justin froze. He looked up at me, stunned. What? No, I repeated, my voice steady. The eviction stands. 30 days. Not a day more. You can't be serious, he stammered, standing up. You're choosing to ruin my family over a grudge. You're choosing this over us. I'm choosing me, I said. For 5 years, I chose you. I chose your family. I chose your pride. And in return, I was treated like a bank account with legs. I'm done choosing people who don't choose me. They're old, he shouted, his face turning red. They're fragile. How can you be so cold? They didn't know you were the owner. If they knew, they would have treated you differently. That's exactly the point, Justin. I snapped, my voice finally rising. They should have treated me with respect, because I am your wife, because I am a human being, not because I hold the deed to their house. If they only respect money, then they can learn what it feels like to have none. Justin stared at me like I was a stranger. You're being heartless, he spat. I didn't think you had this in you. You're cruel. The words stung. Of course they stung. No one wants to be called cruel. But as I looked at him, a man who was more angry at me for standing up for myself than he was at his family for abusing me, I realized that his definition of cruel was warped. To him, cruelty was inconveniencing his parents. To me, cruelty was 5 years of silence. I'm being heartless? I asked quietly. I turned and walked toward the bedroom. I felt heavy, like I was dragging weights, but I kept moving. Yes, he yelled after me. You're acting just like them. I stopped at the bedroom door. I didn't turn around. I learned it from your family, Justin. I said, they taught me that only the strong get a seat at the table. Well, I'm strong now, and I'm clearing the table. I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. I turned the lock. On the other side, I heard Justin bang his fist against the wood once. Then I heard him slide down to the floor, sobbing. He was crying for his parents. He was crying for the easy life I had provided that was now gone. I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I stared at the wall. I knew half the world would say I was right, and the other half would say I was a monster for evicting an 82-year-old woman. Maybe I was a monster, but for the first time in 5 years, I was a monster who respected herself. And as I listened to my husband weep in the hallway, I realized that was a trade I was willing to make. The moving trucks arrived exactly 30 days later, at 8 a.m. sharp. I didn't watch from the window. I didn't drive by to gloat. I didn't need to see Richard's face as he directed the movers to be careful with the antique armoire that wouldn't fit in their new place. I stayed at my office, my home office, and let Mark, the property manager, handle the keys. Mark called me at noon. The property is vacated. Elizabeth. They left it broom swept. One of the chandeliers is missing, but I didn't think you wanted to fight over it. Let them keep it, I said. They'll need something to remind them of the light they lost. They didn't end up on the street. I knew they wouldn't. Richard and Lydia moved into a 2-bedroom condo in Bonita Springs, about 30 minutes north. It's a nice enough complex. It has a community pool and a shared gym. But it isn't the estate. It doesn't have a gate guard who salutes them. It doesn't have a ballroom. The real punishment wasn't the square footage. It was the social circle. Naples is a small town when you have money, but it is a microscopic town when you lose it. The news traveled fast. By the time the moving truck left the driveway, the whispers had already started at the country club. People noticed that the Cannons weren't at the charity gala. They noticed the for lease sign going up on the estate. The rumors were vicious. Some said Richard had been indicted for fraud. Others said Lydia had a gambling problem. I never corrected anyone. I never spread a single rumor. I just let the silence do the work. When people asked me where my in-laws were, I simply took a sip of my iced tea and said, they decided to downsize. Managing the estate was just too much for them at their age. It was the polite, gracious answer. It drove Megan crazy. I heard she tried to tell people I was a monster who evicted them, but nobody really listened. In our world, the person holding the deed holds the truth. As for Justin, well, that is the part that keeps me up at night, though less and less these days. He didn't move into the condo with his parents. He stayed in a hotel for a week, then rented a small apartment near the beach. We haven't filed for divorce yet. At our age, dismantling a life legally is a headache that neither of us is ready for. But we are living apart. He comes over on Saturdays to pick up his mail and get a change of clothes. He looks older. The stress lines around his eyes have deepened. He doesn't yell anymore. He doesn't beg. He just looks at me with a sad, confused expression, like he's trying to figure out where his compliant, quiet wife went. Last Saturday, he stood in the foyer, holding a stack of envelopes. Mom is miserable. He told me she misses the garden. The condo has a balcony, doesn't it? I asked, checking my watch. I had a lunch date in 20 minutes. It's not the same, just inside. He hesitated, then looked at me. Do you miss us? Even a little bit. We were a family, Liz. I looked around my quiet house. I looked at the table where I drink my coffee in peace every morning. I thought about the holidays coming up. Holidays where I wouldn't have to cook a turkey for 12 people who despised me. I wouldn't have to buy gifts for a sister-in-law who mocked my clothes. I wouldn't have to sit in a sunroom while the real family ate in the dining room. I miss the idea of a family, Justin. I told him honestly, but I don't miss the reality of yours. He nodded slowly, turned, and walked out the door. I'm not lonely. That's the thing people don't tell you about standing up for yourself. They tell you that you'll end up alone, but really, you just end up free. Yesterday, I met my girlfriends for lunch on 3rd Street South. We sat outside under the umbrellas, watching the tourists walk by. These were women who knew the whole story. Women who had their own difficult in-laws, their own complicated marriages. To Elizabeth, my friend Sarah said, raising her glass of Pinot Grigio, the landlord of the year. We laughed. It felt good to laugh. I felt radiant. I felt light. I still have moments of doubt. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I was too harsh. I wonder if I should have given them that 6-month grace period. I wonder if God will judge me for not turning the other cheek. But then I remember the feeling of that purse landing on my chair. I remember the look on Justin's face when he told me to leave the table. And I realized something profound. For 5 years, I spent all my energy trying to earn a seat at their table. I bought the food. I paid the mortgage. I swallowed the insults, just hoping that one day they would pull out a chair and say, "Welcome." But they never did, because to them, I wasn't a person, I was a resource. I don't need their chair anymore. I don't need their validation. I have my dignity. I have my peace. And most importantly, I have my self-respect. I realized that a table where you have to beg for a seat is never worth sitting at. So I built my own table. And at my table, everyone is welcome, as long as they know how to treat the host. Was Elizabeth right to evict the elderly parents, or should she have shown mercy for her husband's sake? If your husband told you to sit at another table to please his mother, would you have stayed or left immediately? Do you think a marriage can survive after a wife humiliates the husband's family like this? What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, please consider supporting the channel. Even a small donation makes a big difference and truly helps keep this channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel, and don't forget to subscribe. On the screen right now, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away. With love.